Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I do the first half of my ranking of interesting checklists of 1993. And this is kind of weird, but it actually makes perfect sense because checklists, well, checklists always prior to 1990 were just kind of checklists. They were a card at the end of the set, normally at the end of the set, and they just had a list of numbers and names. Because the whole idea was there was no way for you to know what cards you were missing. You needed to have a checklist to tell you what you still needed to get in order to complete your set. Sometimes you would have team checklists, which would be kind of interesting. But that was really helpful and all. But a regular checklist was just a checklist. There was no reason to dress it up. But that wasn't necessarily a requirement. It's just the way that it was. So it didn't matter if it was Topps or Donruss or Fleer. In all cases, a checklist was just a checklist. And when Upper Deck launched, they did the same thing. It was not really important though. So like when Score was launched, and Pro Set, and Action Packed, and NBA Hoops, they didn't even bother with checklists. NBA Hoops went ahead and did a send away for a checklist if you really wanted one, but there just wasn't enough of a need. They were dead space. But that was until 1990's Leaf set, where Leaf didn't do a lot of interesting things, but they did a few. And one of those was with their checklist, they actually put a portrait of a player on the front of the checklist, which meant now the checklist was actually collectible. It was related to the player. It's not like the card was dominated by the player. He was just kind of featured on it. But still, it added a little bit of interest to the card, which made it a little bit more vibrant in the card set, something you might want. And if you were collecting that player or that team, it actually became something else you needed to get. So, why wouldn't you do this? Thankfully for us, that's exactly what Donruss asked when they were creating Leaf, and they did this. Now, it didn't reshape the industry. So by 1991, Leaf still did this. When Donruss launched Studio, they did something similar. But it was over at Fleer where they launched Ultra. They added a checklist where they figured, why do just a little image? Why not put an entire backdrop behind the checklist of a picture of a player? Maybe even two. So, for instance, over here in football, you have Emmitt Smith on one side, you have Randall Cunningham on the other side. That meant that this is a checklist where you're actually collecting an Emmitt Smith card. It's something worth pursuing. Now, all the checklists that they released in each of their releases were done with the same two players on either side, but still, now these cards were becoming big, vibrant cards as well as checklists, but they were becoming more collectible, or there was a greater potential for their collectability to be appreciated because of the way that they really captured the whole expanse of a cool looking card. The Fleer Ultra design aside. So by 1992, now we started to have kind of a foundation for ways to approach checklists. So we still had the same stuff from Donruss and Leaf. We had a much upgraded card from Ultra, where now not only were they doing a card that was better designed, but they also had different players on each card. So that meant that now you have a whole bunch of different players to collect. But in 1992, there were two sets that really made a big impact, or really were impressive. One was Upper Deck for basketball, where they said, you know what, that's a cool idea with Ultra, but why don't we do that with our entire checklist, all of Michael Jordan? But instead of repeating Michael Jordan shots, they did different shots on every single card, front and back, which meant that if you were collecting Michael Jordan, which a lot of us were, you had to collect all the checklists in order to get all the different images. Brilliant, really cool. But it was over at Pro Line where we saw a whole nother level where they made 9 different checklists for their entire release of 91 and 92. And the cards were designed so that they were puzzle pieces. If you put all 9 cards together on a card page, well, the front of the card or the back of the card, whichever you go with, it actually had the logo for the company. Basically the top of the box. That's the theme art that they did with that whole puzzle. So by the end of 1992, checklists were becoming fun. They were cool. They were interesting. What did that mean for 1993? Well, in 93, it was not necessarily industry-wide as much as across the industry, we saw a whole bunch of different ideas from different companies. And so for the ranking of what they came up with in 1993, I'm doing the bottom half. I'm not including team checklists for the most part. And I'm also not doing themed checklists as well for the most part. I'm just doing regular set checklists. And so I wanted to look at the different ways that they kind of came up with ideas and approached them. And it starts off, the furthest away from the cool one is Playoff, which is pretty unfortunate for Playoff, because Playoff, the whole point of Playoff is very simple. It's the Techchrome technology, which just makes, it's a metallic appearance that just makes the card glow with the right light. It's really cool. But it's also limiting because it only works for the image, and the design elements, you really got to be creative in order to make them work, and they never quite did. They just had a little black box for the name, and in the case of the checklist, they had another box next to it with some writing in it. Really boring. But here's the thing about this card. This is the debut of putting a whole card front for a player on a card. So that meant that, you know, this is a Warren Moon card. It's not just a checklist, it's literally a Warren Moon card. They even have a little bit of writing about him, so it really does become a complete Warren Moon card, even though on the back it's a checklist. By the mid to late 1990s, this would become very standard. But here, this was brand new. So it really provides a great opportunity to appreciate these cards if the design was better, which leads me to a card that doesn't fit at this spot, but this is the right place to talk about it, which is that Playoff also made Contenders. And the Contenders cards read a lot better. Here you can see they actually did do a little bit of designing to work with the whole concept of the technology. So the card reads a lot better, it's interesting, and it's still dedicated to the player. In fact, on the card back, it actually has the write-up talking about the player, so they got that out of the way, so they were still able to do all of that. But the card looks so much better because they actually designed it, which is why it really doesn't fit here. This is more a contrast to the pretty clunky version that they did in Playoff. But regardless, this is where we begin, and then we move on to Donruss in Hockey, where this card really doesn't quite fit on the list. The problem that this card has is that it's, well, boring. But I have to acknowledge, I really do like the fact that they have all 6 of those logos for the Pacific Division on the card. That idea is cool, and it looks it looks nice, not necessarily interesting. Normally I wouldn't put this on because it is too close to a general checklist, but it's also a very interesting idea. And so for me, when you look at the entire expanse of cards, you have great cards, you have boring cards, you have interesting cards, you have lame designs. Across the entire expanse, cards provide a big varied texture of our experience. And so you get a little bit of something here, a little bit of something there, and it all pulls together to make it all look really, it becomes a full, fun journey. And this is an interesting piece of that journey. I'm really glad they made this checklist. If I was going to get a checklist for 1993, this is not the one that I would want to get. But it's a checklist that I'm really excited is in my collection. That's the thing. It's not a great checklist, but it's an interesting idea. So here I have it. Then I move on to Donruss Studio for 1993. And like I'd already said, in 1991, they just had a little image of, I think it was checklist, or I think it was coaches in the first year. And so by 1993, the whole concept of Studio had changed. So now, with these cards, they have a bunch of hats for the different teams. And again, it's kind of boring, but it's also really kind of, it's very unique. And so it's kind of interesting in terms of being unique, and it really fits well with the set. I'm really glad they made these cards. I wish they were more interesting, but really they're interesting in the right way. When I look at the card, I go, oh, that is cool. And then it's time to move on. There's nothing for me to stick around and appreciate about it. But again and again and again, it's so cool that they added this, and it's part of the overall experience of collecting cards. So very cool. Then we have Donruss for baseball. And for Donruss proper for baseball, this card has a wonderful action image. I love the way these images were chosen, and the square shot that they have on the card I think really does work well. I think it looks really good. The problem is that everything else about the card is lackluster. It has a white border because, okay, the set has white borders. All right, I get it. But then, especially on the back, it's all white. And it just depletes the whole capability of that image. I wish that they had done like maybe a light gray for the checklist on the front. So you have the white border around the outside, but then for the area inside, you have something that kind of breaks it up and makes it a little bit more interesting to allow the picture to stand out some more. Otherwise, it feels kind of anemic, and that's the problem with this card. I really do wish they'd done a better job because I think the images are great. And it's not that hard to figure out how to do a better job because, look, Donruss, Leaf, they really did know how to make good cards. In this case, it's a matter of, okay, we designed our regular cards, now do we make the checklist to go with it? And this is a lazy approach. Again, I get the idea, but it's lazy. So, not really all that impressed, but boy, the images are great. But on the flip side, we now move on to Leaf in hockey. And in this case, now you're looking at a front that's very well done, where it's got black as the theme. It's got a very big portrait of or not portrait, but it's a shot from the award ceremony. And I love that they did the checklist cards for the award winners. Great. They even have the write-up there on the front of the card with that wonderful black background. A little bit of gold foil. Looks great. I love the way it all comes together. This is another one of those cases where they have a whole card front that's dedicated to a player. Not as a player card. This is very specially designed, but still, it really comes across well. The white back, the card back, I don't really mind because the card back, ironically, is basically the same as we just saw from Donruss in baseball. In this case, it has gold lines instead of red lines, but still, it's not really a problem because when you look at the card front, it looks really nice, but it lacks energy. So where the Donruss card has wonderful energy, those pictures really do capture the game of baseball. When you move over to hockey, I respect it, I appreciate it, but it's boring. Looks nice, but it lacks the energy that I'd like to see. And so, we're really kind of nitpicking over things that just aren't that big of a deal, but that's the difference from one checklist to another. And this is exactly where I would want to put the playoff contenders card, because now with contenders, it does get all of that stuff together. It has a front that is interesting-ish. It is a complete card. It has a dynamic quality to it with the action. The front is just what you want for an interesting card front, and then the back does its checklist thing without encumbering the cards. So overall, I think it looks really good. But if you want to see a successful checklist card, you go with the last one on this list that I'm going with here, which is Donruss Triple Play. And for Triple Play, 93 was interesting because they took the 92 card, which was a flashy card for kids, and they made it really grown up. They made it like a grown-up version of Donruss, which is funny. It looks really good, really nice, especially with the checklist card. Because you'll see that the checklist card is not as built around individual players like Donruss had been. In the case here with these cards, it's built around just kind of an image that is from the game. So it is focused on pieces of the game, not players in the game. And that's the only thing that holds it back, because otherwise it's got an image about the same size as Donruss, but now with the black border. And especially with that red line inside, it really brings out the image and makes these cards look gorgeous. Love the way that they look. Now this is a card that I would like to put into the top group, but partially because it kind of balances everything out, but also because, again, I love the cards, but they don't have the interest that I'd really like to see. That's why I have it here, whereas for the next video I'm going to do, which is looking at the best successes of interesting checklists for 1993, that's going to be checklists that fit into that category of, dude, these are just awesome. So that's definitely look out for that video when it comes up. That's going to be a week from now if you're watching this right when I brought it up. If you haven't seen my other rankings videos, I love doing these ranking videos, and I'm up to 1993 going through different aspects of card design. So if you haven't checked those out, do make sure to do so, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And yeah, I want to thank you for watching.